It is therefore my privilege to introduce our esteemed panelists whose insight will help our understanding of the challenges and the opportunities before us. Following their remarks, we will open the floor to members of Parliament for further debate. Honorable colleagues, allow me now to introduce our distinguished keynote speaker. It is my great honor to introduce Professor Felipe Sanz. Professor Sanz is a world-known international lawyer, professor of law at the University College London, and a leading figure in public international law, human rights, and international justice, and has worked on some of the most important cases in international court, shaping global legal thinking. But beyond his legal career, Professor Sanz has also played a unique role in bringing international law to the wider public through his powerful writing and storytelling. So, I cannot think of anyone better to help us frame the conversation on the principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, accountability, and the future of multilateral cooperation. Professor Sanz, we are truly delighted to have you with us today, and we very much look forward to your keynote speech. Professor Felipe Sanz, the floor is yours, sir. Is not that right? Sorry?
Dollar Street, the next speaker. No, I know.
Hmm? What do we do now?
I think you're reaching go.
Just create a paragraph that says
And you accept it at the judge time?
everything else they've accepted.
Huh?
They've accepted everything.
Right, so leave it at the judge and you were going to add it to the paragraph.
Yeah.
Right.
I think it should be okay.
Not there?
We lost him, but we propose to go to the second one. She's online, okay? And then we come back to Professor.
Yes. Go to the panel discussion. Go to the panel discussion, and we start with Donette.
Yeah, the person in the middle of a speech to get him.
Yes. This one.
Colleagues, just a little bit technicality. We will move from Professor Sands and we will now take Madame Donette Street. She's an international maritime law consultant, senior foreign service officer on behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So we will now go to Madame Street. The floor is yours, Madam.
Thank you very much. Co-Chair, can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we're hearing you clearly.
Okay, great. Thank you. I did have some slides. Okay. Thank you. Oh, Professor Sands is here. Do you want me to hold?
No, continue.
Continue. Okay. So, well, thank you, Co-Chair. I would like to stand on the protocols already established and say good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to contribute to this most important topic from the perspective of Guyana. I am going to restrict my presentation to Guyana's experience in the search for a resolution of our disagreement with Venezuela. I have organized, next slide please. I have organized my presentation to you today in 4 parts. First, I will give a brief historical overview of the Guyana-Venezuela controversy. Then I will just discuss briefly the path to the International Court of Justice. I will also delve a little bit into the role of the international community in the search for a resolution of this controversy, and certainly in the support to Guyana as it seeks to find a solution. And then I will end by talking briefly about why multilateralism matters in the resolution of this country, why it matters to Guyana in particular in the resolution of this controversy. So next slide, please. Thank you. So believe it or not, Guyana's land border, we do have a land boundary with Venezuela, and that land border with Venezuela was delimited over 100 years ago through a binding legal process, so that the controversy that exists now between our 2 states began with Venezuela's rejection in 1962 of the 1899 arbitral award, which was rendered unanimously by 5 distinguished arbitrators at the time, empaneled to determine the boundary line. Significantly, Venezuela accepted and implemented the award, including by participating in a border marker exercise between the period 1903 to 1905 with the British to actually drive poles in the ground in accordance with the coordinates contained in the award. So she had scrupulously respected the boundary for more than 60 years. Then, in 1962, with the impending independence of Guyana, Venezuela, for the very first time, claimed that the award was invalid, the boundary was unsettled. Essequibo, which is a significant portion, Essequibo actually constitutes 2/3 of Guyana's sovereign territory. Venezuela claimed that Essequibo belongs to her.
The other speaker, Mr. Sands, is on.
Next slide, please.
If we don't get him now, then we may not get him after because he only have a small window.
And in 1966, shortly before Guyana became independent, the United Kingdom and Venezuela reached an agreement. Today, on a day like today, 60 years ago, the actual date of the agreement is the 17th of February, 1960.
Madam Street,
Yes?
my apologies, but
Okay.
the speaker before, you have time, the next speaker doesn't. He's online. We're asking you if you could just create that space.
Yes, I don't mind.
Thank you very much. Thank you very
I
much.
don't mind at all.
So we'll come right back to you as soon as we're
No
through.
problem.
We will now go back to Professor Felipe Sands.
It's lovely to join you. And Donette, can I just begin by apologizing? I'm in the middle of a hearing, and so I've got my 15 minutes, and I would love to watch the rest of your presentation because, as you know, I'm one of the privileged counsel to be acting for Guyana at this moment, and we will have later this year hearings in the case, and we are extremely hopeful that Guyana, with the support of Caribbean countries and the European Union, will bring this finally to a successful conclusion. So I'm apologizing, but I've been asked to speak more broadly about territorial issues and the rule of law, and I'm so very pleased to be able to join you because this is obviously right now a situation of very great significance and challenge, very frankly, particularly in the Caribbean region, with various things that are going on in relation to Venezuela, in relation to allegations about narco-trafficking and how to take out the threat of narco-trafficking. The bottom line of it is that we have a system of international rules that was put in place in 1945. The beating heart of those rules was to establish a number of fundamental principles. One of those principles is respect for territorial integrity in the context of decolonization. A second fundamental principle is the non-use of military force, except in self-defense or when authorized by the UN Security Council. And a third set of rules is protection of the fundamental rights of individuals and of groups. Of course, I could go on. Another one of the fundamental rules is the principle of permanent sovereignty over natural resources. And I think you, in the region in particular, but also the European Union, with the challenges that it faces in relation to Ukraine, is acutely aware of the threats that are going on now. I need only mention Ukraine, the abduction of a man who considered himself to be president of Venezuela, and his taking to stand trial in the United States, the use of military force to target boats in the Caribbean and in the Pacific. To speak very frankly, these are fundamental violations of the rules-based system that was created and put in place in 1945. There is no justification in law for any of these acts. And one has to, I think, as an observer, I'm not a diplomat, I'm not a government minister, I can speak openly, call a spade a spade. Now, the context of what is happening in your region, what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in Sudan, what's happening in relation to Israel, Palestine, and Gaza, has caused quite a number of reasonable people to say that we now live in a post-rules world, that we live in a world without law. I've written recently to resist that idea. The rules-based system that emerged in 1945, which plainly faces very serious challenges, remains in place. All of the rules that I mentioned remain applicable and in full force and effect, and if anyone violates those rules, they are subject to the legal consequences. The practical aspect of those legal consequences is, of course, much more difficult. In fact, as I've written, I gave a lecture, the Francis Mann lecture in November, and went into this in detail, and the Guardian newspaper then summarized my arguments. 98% of international rules work incredibly well. The rules that allow us to use our mobile phones, to get on a plane and fly around the world, to allow the sale of goods, to allow us to buy things on the internet, all these are buttressed by international rules which work perfectly well. The rules which are under threat include the rules relating to respect for territorial integrity, the prohibition on the use of force, and respect for the rights of individuals. And the question then arises, what is to be done about this? And again, I think I can permit myself to speak freely. The transformation that has occurred in the past 15 months or so with the election of a new US-American president is obviously something that one has to take account of, and has led to a change of position by the United States, which many people are now trying to react to. That is felt across the board. This is not an effort to get rid of the rules, it's an effort to get rid of basically rules that provide for multilateral arrangements. So if one takes, for example, the position taken by President Trump and his administration on tariffs, and some of the countries in the room will be acutely aware of what I'm talking about, the idea is to essentially step out of the multilateral system of trade rules, the World Trade Organization and various regional arrangements, including the arrangements between Mexico, the United States and Canada, which replaced the NAFTA, and replace them with a multitude of bilateral arrangements. That is really what is in issue at this particular time. And for the Caribbean region and for the European Union, that poses very fundamental questions. How do states that are smaller or middle powers react to what is going on? Whether it is actions taken by the United States or actions taken by China, which ironically appears to be rather more committed to a multilateral rules-based system today than the United States, or Russia in Ukraine. And I have to say, I sort of take my cue from the speech that was given at Davos by the Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney. And if you haven't watched that speech, it's about 20 minutes long. I think it is well worth watching, because in it, he sets out various messages, one of which is to recognize that the system of international rules is under assault, and we cannot turn a blind eye to that. I'm not starry-eyed about that reality. But the second point that he makes is that countries need to come together to ensure that the values and principles that they care about are taken forward. I've had the great privilege in the past of working with CARICOM, particularly in the context of climate change and some of the trade issues at the WTO, and I've seen for myself what happens when countries come together and negotiate together. I was in Geneva back in 1990, working with a marvelous woman from Trinidad, sadly no longer with us, Angela Cropper, and the Environment Minister of Trinidad, Lincoln Myers, to live through the moment when the Alliance of Small Island States was created. And I've seen for myself what happens when the Alliance of Small Island States, AOSIS, negotiates as a bloc in the context of the Framework Convention on Climate Change and in relation to other issues, including issues of fishery and trade. And very often, AOSIS and CARICOM have come together with the European Union in common cause. And what Mark Carney's message essentially was, is that there is a large number of countries around the world who actually have common cause. This is not a left issue or a right issue. It's not a big country or a small country issue. It's not a resource-rich or a resource-poor issue. The vast majority of the countries in the world are strongly supportive of a multilateral rules-based system to protect their territorial integrity, to maintain their permanent sovereignty over natural resources. And I think what we're learning in this period is that if you work together and you resist efforts at bullying and at threats, you've at least got a better chance of withstanding those kinds of changes. Let me compare 2 points in relation to the European Union. The European Union several months ago negotiated a trade agreement with the United States. It was, here I speak personally, I have to say, I think a rather poor trade agreement from the perspective of the European Union, because the EU, as I think many observers and some governments have subsequently felt and reported, basically caved in to the bullying. And the upshot of it was, firstly, an agreement which was lopsided in favour of one side, the United States, and secondly, an agreement that was then violated by the United States at will, simply imposing further tariffs where it wished to do so. The second example, Europe took a very different approach. Europe, in relation to the issue which you will recall from about a month ago, United States territorial claims on Greenland, stood together with one voice. Very different than the approach in relation to tariffs. And the effect, at least for a month, who knows where it's going to go in the future, was to cause the President of the United States to back off in relation to the immediate claims of the situation. I think you've got a similar situation in relation to the targeted killings of alleged narco-traffickers in the Caribbean Sea and on the other side in the Pacific. There is a question for countries in the region: how on earth do you deal with actions that are on their face blatantly illegal? Narco-trafficking is plainly a problem and a terrible thing, but it is not a thing that allows a state to use or threaten the use of force. And so the question for a forum like yours, I suspect, is to decide: how does the EU and the Caribbean come together in the next period to identify its common values and its common interests? Some countries, the UK and the French, have reportedly stopped their intelligence sharing with the United States in relation to some of these acts in the Caribbean and on the Pacific side. That's something France and the UK can just about do, although even they have trouble getting away with it. But what are much smaller countries of the European Union and the Caribbean to do faced with these kinds of threats? I think the reality is it's about coming together and making sure that those countries stand as one. Coming back to Donette's intervention, which I'm so grateful to her for giving me the space before I go back to my arbitration hearing that I'm involved in, we've seen what happens when countries stand together as one in relation to the issue of the dispute between Guyana and Venezuela. Guyana has been tremendously supported by CARICOM and tremendously supported by the European Union. And that has had the effect of limiting the ability of Venezuela to make territorial incursions. It has threatened, but it has never actually done it. There is another case that I've been deeply involved with for 14 years, and that is the former British colony known as Chagos, the Chagos Archipelago, which was part of Mauritius when Mauritius gained independence in 1968, except that the United Kingdom decided it wanted to dismember a part of the colony and keep it. And by duress, it persuaded the then leadership of Mauritius pre-independence to supposedly grant consent to the dismemberment of that colonial territory. 50 years on, Mauritius went to the International Court of Justice. It did so with the support, and I think I've been told it was the first time that this happened, of the entire African Union, at the General Assembly of the United Nations, at the African Union, and in other international fora. And as you probably know, in 2019, as a result of resolutions which miraculously got through the United Nations, Mauritius obtained an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice. which determined that the United Kingdom was in unlawful occupation of part of the territory of Mauritius in Africa, and its unlawful occupation had to end. The two countries have now negotiated a treaty. It was signed in May 2025, and that treaty, once it has passed the parliaments of both countries, will come into force and recognise the completion of the decolonisation of the territory of Mauritius. Similarly, with climate change, we've seen with the advisory opinion at the International Court of Justice what happens when Caribbean countries and Pacific countries and other smaller countries hang together and argue together before an international forum like the International Court. The ICJ gives an advisory opinion which goes very, very far in respecting the territorial and other interests of the smaller countries. So I think the message that I conclude with is, yes, the rules-based system is under challenge, but no, it hasn't gone away. And third point, the only way we hang on to it and the only way we develop it and build it up is through alliances between like-minded countries. And it was for that reason that I interrupted an arbitration hearing to address this most important first annual plenary of the Caribbean EU Parliamentary Assembly to encourage you in your deliberations and discussions and wish you well in building an alliance of values which includes a commitment, which I know the Caribbean countries have and the European Union has, to this vital thing we call the rule of law, not only in the domestic context, but also in the international context. It's a difficult moment, but hanging together, I think, is the only way to go, and that way does provide a path forward. Thank you so much for your kind attention, and Donette, thank you once more, and I wish, as you know, Guyana every success in the coming hearings in which I am so very privileged to be a part. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Sands. Now we will go back to Madam Street. Thank you for giving us that time, Madam. It's now back to your presentation.
It's fine. You are more than welcome. Thank you. And we were on the 1966 Geneva Agreement. And I was saying that today is actually a very special day, in that today is the day we celebrate the 60th anniversary of the signing of the Geneva Agreement, which is a very critical instrument in the search for the resolution of this, this matter that we have with Venezuela. And so, principally, the agreement seeks to establish a mechanism for reaching a peaceful, a final, and a binding resolution of the controversy, which was created because of Venezuela's belated challenge to the validity of their award. The agreement provided that Guyana, of course, would become a party to that agreement, which it did a few months later when we gained independence in May of that same year. So the agreement basically established a 4-year timetable for Guyana and Venezuela to negotiate a solution. So it does a number of things. One, it started out with a bilateral, with the search for a bilateral solution to the controversy, but that was given a time limit of 4 years. And the agreement further provided that if the negotiations between the two countries failed, which they did, then the parties would attempt to reach an agreement on formal means of settlement, meaning specifically Article 33 of the United Nations Charter, which deals with the Pacific settlement of disputes. And so the agreement says that if the bilateral negotiations fail, then we look for a means of resolution within Article 33 of the Charter. And if we cannot agree on a means of resolution within Article 33 of the UN Charter, which we didn't, then we would leave that choice of the means of settlement to either an international organization or the Secretary General, an international organization to which both parties agree, which we didn't, or the Secretary General of the United Nations. And so the Secretary General would now be empowered to choose the means of settlement, and the parties would then be bound by the Secretary General's decision. And so we couldn't agree on an organization, and so by default, we had to agree on the Secretary General, and the Secretary General was empowered now to choose a means stipulated by in Article 33 of the Charter, and so on, until the controversy has been resolved, or until all of the means of peaceful settlement there contemplated have been exhausted. So this clause is critical in relation to the issue that we are discussing today. It expressly anticipates a multilateral framework and international dispute settlement mechanism in the event of the failure of bilateral talks. Next slide, please. And just briefly, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. And just briefly, so the Secretary decided that the means of settlement would be a good offices process, and he would appoint a personal representative to represent him and act under his supervision. This process lasted from 1990 to 2016 under a succession of personal representatives and secretaries general. Now, despite the commitment and time of these secretaries general and appointees, no substantive progress was made towards the settlement of the controversy. We had diametrically opposing views. Guyana insisted on the validity of the 1999 award and the resulting boundary, and Venezuela, for its part, insisted on the invalidity of the award while providing no evidence. In 2014, Guyana then signaled to the Secretary General its dissatisfaction with this process because we were nowhere nearer to a resolution of the controversy than when we first started. And furthermore, outside of the good offices process, and while we sat in talks with Venezuela, Venezuela's actions on the border became increasingly aggressive and belligerent towards Guyana. Violations of Guyana's sovereignty and territorial integrity by Venezuelan armed forces became more frequent. The Venezuelan army terrorized Guyanese people on the border. Anybody who tried to use any of the boundary rivers were terrorized. Sometimes they were held at gunpoint by the Venezuelan armed forces. For its part, the government of Venezuela sought to restrict and to scare away investors from investing in Guyana's Essequibo region. And so things were not, the situation was escalating even while we were in bilateral talks. So when his term ended in December 2016, Secretary General then Ban Ki-moon recommended to his successor, the current Secretary General, that he should continue the mediation efforts for 1 more year, after which he should exercise his power under the Geneva Agreement to decide that the good offices process has having failed, then the next means of settlement would be adjudication by the International Court of Justice. So Secretary General Guterres, of course, accepted this recommendation, and the mediation continued until the end of 2017. And obviously, with no progress made toward the resolution, the Secretary General decided in January of 2018 that the controversy should be resolved by the ICJ. And subsequently, Guyana filed an application with the International Court of Justice instituting proceedings against Venezuela in March of 2018. And we asked the court to do 2 things. One, basically, determine that the award, that the 1899 award is valid and that it is binding on both states, and that the lawful international boundary between the 2 countries is the one that was established by that award. And so Professor Sands already mentioned, we are now at an advanced stage of the ICJ process. Guyana, in December of 2024, submitted to the court its final written brief on the merits of the case, and Venezuela in August of 2015 2025 submitted its rejoinder, bringing the written phase of the merits proceedings to a close. And so the court will meet with us later on in the year for oral hearings on the merits of the case, and this will be followed by the court's deliberation and issuance of its final judgment. Thank you. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. The role of the international community in the resolution, in the search for a resolution of this conflict. I can say without a shadow of a doubt that Guyana would not be where it was. We would not be where we are in this advanced stage of a resolution to this controversy without the assistance of the international community. And I have listed a number of international organizations that we engage with routinely and whose assistance has been tremendous to Guyana. And so I want to start out by saying that the Caribbean community, as our closest multilateral neighbor, has been a bulwark of support to Guyana. CARICOM has always firmly supported Guyana in pursuance of the resolution of the matter with Venezuela through the process before the ICJ. CARICOM has also repeatedly called on Venezuela to respect the various processes, whether it was the Good Offices process, the ICJ, and including the decisions, the conservatory measures that were determined by the ICJ. The second organization that I want to briefly mention is the Commonwealth. In 1999, the Commonwealth heads of government met in Durban and constituted a group of Commonwealth foreign ministers to monitor further developments in respect of the existing controversy between Guyana and Venezuela. That group, which is known as the Commonwealth Ministerial Group on Guyana, is still operational until today and comprises Antigua and Barbuda, Bangladesh, Canada, Guyana, Jamaica, South Africa, and the United Kingdom. That group meets every year to discuss this matter and to think of ways in which this matter could be resolved, all while keeping the peace. So we have that. And I have the other organizations that I have put in this category, very, 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 very critical to how we have advanced in this particular issue. And Excellencies, you may recall that the Venezuelan National Assembly in September of 2023 called for a referendum regarding the enforcement of Venezuela's claim to Guyana's Essequibo region. Guyana did everything we normally do. We condemned the passing of the resolution as illegal, of course, since it violates the Geneva Agreement and it was inconsistent with the decision of the Secretary General to submit the validity of the award to the ICJ for adjudication. And importantly, this decision by the Venezuela to conduct this referendum also drew condemnations from the Organization of American States, the Commonwealth, the EU, CARICOM, and many of our other partners, bilateral partners. However, Venezuela, in typical fashion, decided to go ahead with its referendum. And so the government of Guyana promptly approached the ICJ for provisional measures, specifically to request that Venezuela be ordered not to take any of the actions that were contemplated or were called for by the referendum. Specifically, Venezuela wanted to create a new Venezuelan state, which would be Guyana's Essequibo region, and then incorporate that state into Venezuelan territory, and then grant Venezuelan citizenship and identity cards to the population living in the region. We indicated to the court that this would amount to an unlawful annexation of Guyana's territory in violation of the most fundamental principles of international law enshrined in the UN Charter of the respect for the territorial integrity and political independence of each state. So the court of each other. So, of course, the court listened to us and to the parties, and the court issued an order in December of 2023, on the 1st of December, in saying, among other things, number one, that pending a final decision in the case, Venezuela refrained from taking any action which would modify the situation, and that both parties should refrain from taking any action which might aggravate or extend the dispute which was currently before the court. However, again, in typical Venezuelan fashion, and in flagrant violation of the order of the court, the Venezuelan National Assembly on December 5th, 2023, announced its intention to enact legislation to formally incorporate Guyana's Essequibo region. Venezuela. Tensions rose between the two countries. Tensions were at an all-time high. I think it had that the level of the escalation of the tension was at an all-time high in the memory of any person who was familiar with this issue and living at the time. There was mobilization of troops, Venezuelan troops, on the border, and they would, from reports that were received, there was mobilization, not just mobilization of troops, mobilization of weaponry, tanks, armory, all of this. Guyanese living on the border with Venezuela, I can tell you this, became very, very scared. We had a massive influx of Guyanese residents from on the border into the city, into the area. Homes were abandoned, and then, and then the President Maduro at the time, he was on the television every day, I think issuing threats about what was going to happen and this is not going to happen. And so I think in the face of those tensions, and at the instance of CARICOM and CELAC, the presidents of Guyana and Venezuela met at Argyle in St. Vincent and the Grenadines on the 14th of December to attempt to lessen those tensions. Now, the joint declaration of Argyle for dialogue and peace between Guyana and Venezuela emanated from those discussions. In that declaration, the parties agreed not to threaten or use force against each other in any circumstance, and to resolve their disagreements in accordance with international law, including the 1966 Geneva Agreement. They also agreed to establish a joint commission of the foreign ministers and their technical teams from each side to address matters of mutual interest to the parties. It was an attempt for us to engage in cooperation activities as a means of lessening the tension, while the issue of the border was being dealt with by the court. One meeting of this commission was convened. It was facilitated by Brazil, is in the presence of observers from the UN, from CELAC, from CARICOM, from other agencies, and also from individual states with an interest in maintaining the region as a zone of peace. Excellencies, I can tell you that there was an immediate de-escalation of tensions after that meeting. Sadly, short-lived. Venezuela soon resorted to a series of unjustified and aggressive actions against Guyana again, including unauthorized overflights and illegal incursions into our territory. And there was one incident that included the detention of Guyana's military personnel at gunpoint by Venezuelan military personnel in the Cuyuni River. And then on April 3rd, 2024, Venezuela promulgated a law purporting to formally incorporate Guyana's Essequibo region into Venezuela. This was, of course, a breach of the court's order. And so on April 9, 2024, the UN Security Council facilitated Guyana's request for a private meeting of the Council to address this issue of the law that was promulgated by Venezuela. And following that meeting, the members of the Security Council issued a statement in which the members expressed their concern about the possible escalation of tensions between the two countries. They urged the parties to exercise maximum restraint, reminding them of their obligations to comply with the order of the court. And so the Security Council also commended the regional effort, which resulted in the conclusion of the Argyll Declaration. I want to point out also that the Guyana-EU political consultation occurs annually, and the Guyana-Venezuela controversy is a staple item on the agenda during those consultations. So we meet with the EU and we discuss a range of issues relating to the development of relations between the two sides. And so there's always the discussion on the controversy and really an examination of the ways and means of which this issue could be resolved. We have, Professor Sands spoke to the issue of common values and common interests. And certainly when it comes to this particular issue, Guyana and the EU do have common values and common interests in this particular matter.
Madam Street?
Yes, sorry.
You may want to wrap up in the next 2 minutes, please.
Yes, I have one more slide.
Thanks.
Yes. And so we have that. And so this issue of the common values and the common interest, that is something that really we have discussed, and Guyana has really maintained the support of the EU in this regard. And so I have one more slide. Next slide, please. And just to say why this is important for Guyana, Sir Sridat in writing, Sir Sridat Ramphal, who was a Guyanese involved in these issues and former Secretary General of Commonwealth, in writing about the actions of Venezuela towards Guyana over the years, spoke of the David and Goliath torment. And we're talking about a state that is significantly larger in size, in population and resources. So we see the benefit of throwing ourselves at the mercy of the rule of international law and the hallowed principles contained in the UN Charter, particularly relating to refraining from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity and political independence of states, the sanctity of treaties, and the peaceful settlements of disputes. Now, we have also, with respect to the issue of the broader legitimacy of the decisions of the court, most countries respect and see the value of complying with international law, including the decisions of the International Court of Justice. On the issue of conflict management, I already mentioned the complete de-escalation that occurred following the meeting at Argyll, and we see that there's value in multilateral engagement in preventing escalation of conflicts in areas where they occur. And then in relation to the implementation of decisions, we know Article 94.2 of the UN Charter speaks to the issue of resort to the Security Council once a decision of the International Court of Justice has been issued and there's an issue of non-compliance with the decision of the court. And so generally, in the Guyana-Venezuela case, these multilateral mechanisms help to anchor the controversy in long-standing principles of international law. And I think, rather than the use of force or coercion or the bilateral relationship where there's an imbalance of power. And so we have found it very useful. And that has brought me to the end of my presentation. Thank you for providing me this opportunity, and thank you for listening.
We thank you very much, Madam. Thanks for that insightful piece. We will now move the floor to Martin Billy Herman, Managing Director for Multilateral Relations, Human Rights and Democracy, and Deputy Political Director, European External Action Service. The floor is now given to you, sir.
No, thank you very much, Mr. President. I mean, Excellencies, co-presidents, honourable members of Parliament, I mean, colleagues and friends, let me start by saying that it is a real pleasure to address this inaugural session of the Caribbean EU Interparliamentary Assembly. I suppose my only regret is that I'm not able to be there in person today. Now, but on a more serious note, colleagues, I mean, I suppose we convene at a moment, I mean, and I think Donette and Professor Sand said it also, at a moment of, I suppose, where the scaffolding, if you like, of our international order is under significant strain. And I suppose we see the consequences of this every day, from the rising tides threatening the coastlines of the Caribbean to the flagrant violations of sovereignty and territorial integrity in Europe and beyond. No, I suppose the reality is our shared values are being tested. But I also think it's important to say that standing here together today, I think we send a clear message, and that is that multilateralism is not a relic of the past. No, it is our only viable path to a resilient future. We are sending also a message that multilateralism is not dead; it's alive and kicking, and it delivers. No, I think just last year in Antigua and Barbuda, we witnessed what effective multilateralism actually looks like. I think the adoption of the Antigua and Barbuda agenda for SIDS was a triumph of collective will, and the EU was really proud to support what we think was a breakthrough, and particularly, I suppose, the historic recognition of the link between climate change and security. We heard your call to keep 1.5 degree target alive, and we stand by it. And I think what's important, and I think this also goes for multilateralism, we're not just sort of offering words, no, and through the global gateway and with our member states, we are translating the Antigua and Barbuda agenda for SIDS pillars into reality, investing more than €1 billion in bilateral assistance and providing billions more in credit lines through the European Investment Bank to focus on climate finance, on debt sustainability, and of course on the blue economy, protecting, if you like, also the vital marine ecosystems that are the lifeblood of the Caribbean. Now, all these development gains, and I suppose that's my second message, is the need to, if you like, strengthen the multilateral core, because all these development gains are fragile if the global system that protects them is allowed to crumble. And we are today seeing a growing disregard for international law and the UN Charter, but also a lack of willingness to give that system its support also when it comes to resources. The European Union is doing what it can, depending a little bit on how you put the figures together, provides between 20 to 30% of the UN's budget, and we do this not only out of generosity, because we think it is our interest to see a multilateral system that really works. Not a system of the past. This is not a conservationist agenda, because I think, as we look to the future, I think it's really important that our regions join forces, because we need a UN that is fit for the future, one that is cost efficient, responsive, and reflects in many ways the modern world and the challenges that we face. From the European Union side, we are very much willing and interested in partnering with the Caribbean and working hand in hand with alliances like the Alliance of Small Island States, AOSIS, in New York, to promote exactly this agenda of what you might call progressive change. That also includes the urgent need for a reform of the international financial architecture. I think it is time that vulnerability is recognized as a core criterion for justice in development finance, and I just want to take this opportunity also to recognize the leadership of Prime Minister of Barbados, because I think Mia Mottley, with her Bridgetown Initiative 3.0, strongly supported by CARICOM and of course Small Island Development States, have really shown leadership and demonstrated that leadership does not only come from big nations, it comes also from great nations and great people. Now, my third and perhaps final point is this issue, and I think both Professor Sands and Donette raised, is this issue of sovereignty and territorial integrity, because this is perhaps our most fundamental shared principle, the respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity, and as Donette said, a commitment to the peaceful settlement of dispute. Now, I think, in our view, respect for sovereignty is not just a question of political choice, it's a binding legal obligation, whether in Ukraine, in Sudan, or any other corner of the globe. Now, the EU's position is unequivocal, borders cannot be changed by force. Now, I suppose in the Caribbean, you understand better than most that for a small state, the law is the only shield against the, what you might call the might makes right philosophy. For us, I suppose the reality is that when we defend the sovereignty of one nation, we are in essence defending the sovereignty of all. And I think what we must remain is a strong cross-regional alliance that rejects aggression and upholds the independence of every state, regardless of its size or geographic location. Now, the European Union has consistently, and I think both Donette and Professor Sand spoke to this, has consistently recognized the International Court of Justice as the principal judicial organ of the United Nations, reaffirming support for its role in settling disputes and providing advisory opinions based on international law. Now, the EU upholds the binding nature of ICJ orders and supports its work to ensure a rules-based global order. Now, I think it was Professor Sands that referred a little bit to my native home country of Denmark. Now, I will not talk about Greenland, but I just want to mention a little bit of a story, and that is the story of a 50-year-long border dispute between Canada and the Kingdom of Denmark. A border dispute that was not settled by going to war or by imposition of force. It was settled at the negotiation table after almost 51 years of dispute over the little-known island of Hans Island. Now, the result of this negotiation was not only the peaceful settlement of dispute, but it actually also resulted in the longest undisputed maritime border in the world. So I suppose the point here is that what you need is adherence to principles, you need adherence to law, and then you need the patience that comes out of recognition that it serves everybody's interest to actually adhere to rules. Now, just in closing, say a little bit about sort of what I think is developing into, in effect, an alliance, because I suppose the Samoa Agreement, has given us in many ways the legal framework. The Antigua and Barbuda Agenda for SIDS has given us the roadmap. Now, I think actually what this Interparliamentary Assembly must do is perhaps provide, how should I say, the political oxygen to keep these agreements alive and continue to develop, because I think we need the political impetus of the parliamentary diplomacy to move and to continue to move this agenda forward. Now, I think the relationship between the European Union and the Caribbean is no longer sort of just one of donor and recipient, or two regions far apart. It is a strategic political alliance. It's an alliance that places resilience at the heart of development, and in many ways translate multilateralism from this sort of ideological or theoretical concept into concrete results for your citizens. Because I think that perhaps is my final message, that multilateralism is this thing that if you don't use it, you lose it. And what we must recognize is that if we don't stand together, we are not as strong as we would be if we did. And I just want to close by saying you can count on the European Union to stay the course together with the Caribbean. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Herman. Thank you, distinguished guest speakers, for the time and for the sharing of your insights. This has given us valuable context and perspective for our discussion. I will now open the floor to the parliamentarians willing to ask questions or to contribute to the debate. The floor is now open. Honorable Coral Trench, Belize.
Maritime claim to Belize through the adjudication by the International Court of Justice, the ICJ. The written phase of the case is complete. Incursions into our maritime space and aggressive posture on the Sarstoon River have challenged our security forces. Our Belize Defense Force have always acted with calm and restraint and will continue to do so. Belize and Guatemala have worked to strengthen their bilateral relationship and enjoy strong political friendship, but the border issues remain a challenge to the relationship. Belize is committed to the peaceful settlement of Guatemala's claim at the ICJ. We count on the support of the OACPS and the European Union partners to support the Belize-Guatemala process and, importantly, the implementation of the ICJ judgment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Juan Fernandez Lopez Aguila.
Thank you so much, Mr. Co-Chair. Actually, it's very good news that
you have 3 minutes.
It's very good news that international law still matters. Still matters. Very good news, because yes, we're all aware that there are some rogue players going rogue again and again, and bringing us into disorder, into a global disorder. Mr. Carney was quoted, Prime Minister of Canada, by making the case of the so-called middle states. But the thing is that we, both sides of the oceans, we're somewhat bigger than a middle kind of a power. We can actually be of relevance if we join forces, because the European Union encompasses nothing less than 27 member states, and the Caribbean partners are also 15. So we can actually be of significance in order to bring in some international law restored. And it's also good news that 2 conflictual cases have been explained, Guatemala and Belize and Venezuela and Guyana, and none of them have gone out of control. None of them have resorted into some kind of an actual conflict. It was the case in the 19th century. There was the Chaco War, but it was long ago. Now, these kind of territorial disputes are not sorted out by violent or aggressive means or tools, but through international laws. It's been explained, so it's very, very comforting. The point I wanted to make to Mrs. Donette Street, because I understand that Philip Sand is somehow involved in a legal case and not available, so I would bring the case to the international consultant we heard of, is that according to your knowledge and assessment, would it make any sense that in the Caribbean partners, they would contemplate some kind of mutual reassurance kind of a clause, as is the case of the European Union? We do have in the treaties of the European Union some mutual reassurance, actually some collective defense against an aggression, tantamount or replicating Article 5 of the Treaty of Foundational Treaty of NATO. We have an Article 42.7 that we have actually highlighted just recently for the case of Greenland. It was worth noticing that it's always been there. Would it make sense that in the Caribbean partners there would be some sort of mutual reassurance or collective defense, considering that we are talking mostly of micro-states, island states, which are vulnerable in every possible way, and the means for self-defense are limited? Just for the grounds of size, it's reasonable assessment that they would actually need each other instead of relying on individual capacities of defense. Should anyone go rogue, or should anyone decide to claim an island or to open up a territorial dispute that we don't foresee by now, but could well be the case, as it is often the case in other parts of the world? That would be my question to the consultant we heard of. Thank you, Co-Chair Clark, for your patience. Thank you.
Antigua and Barbuda.
Thank you, Co-Chair. I'd first start by admitting that I missed the presentations due to...
And you also have 3 minutes.
Due to 3 minutes only? I would ask that I get an extra minute as host. I'll miss the presentations, Chair, but I find it's too important a subject or an issue not to make a contribution Allow me to blend historical evidence with present-day realities to make the case for this very important issue of territorial integrity and multilateralism. I want to thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to address you on this subject that is neither abstract nor distant for small states such as ours. Territorial integrity and multilateralism. For Europe, these are foundational principles born out of hard experience. For small states in the Caribbean, they are existential safeguards. Today, both are under strain. The European Union emerged from a continent once devastated by territorial revisionism and unrestrained power politics. Europe learned at immense cost that borders cannot be changed by force and that sovereignty must be respected, and that durable peace requires institutions anchored in law. Those lessons shaped the post-1945 international order. The Charter of the United Nations, particularly Article 2.4, codified the principle that all states shall refrain from the threat of or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of another state. This was not idealism, it was necessity. That same necessity now confronts us again. In a world of shifting power balances, multilateralism is sometimes portrayed as bureaucratic, slow, or outdated. For large powers, it may be a policy preference, but for small states like ours in the Caribbean, it's a lifeline. When international law weakens, when institutions are sidelined, when power replaces principle, it's not the powerful who suffer, it is the vulnerable. The Caribbean region continues to confront territorial tensions, including matters before the International Court of Justice, where adherence to law rather than force is indispensable. We rely on multilateral institutions not because they're perfect, but because without them, we have little protection against coercion. We are witnessing a period in which territorial integrity is defended vigorously in some theaters, while questioned or revitalized in others. The war in Ukraine has highly galvanized Europe around the defense of sovereignty and the rejection of aggression. That moral clarity must be made universal. The principle of borders cannot be rejoined by force, cannot be geographically sensitive or selective. If multilateralism is to endure, its norms must be applied consistently, not according to power, proximity, or political convenience. Territorial integrity and multilateralism are inseparable. When multilateral institutions are weakened, territorial integrity becomes negotiable. And when territorial integrity becomes negotiable, the international order begins to unravel. We are entering an era of renewed great power rivalry, information manipulation, economic coercion, and institutional fatigue. Small states feel these pressures acutely. That is why we look to partners such as Europe and the European Union, whose very identity rests on rules-based cooperation, to defend not only European security, but the integrity of the international system itself. Honourable members, parliaments shape budgets, parliaments shape oversight, parliaments shape foreign policy priorities. In this moment, our role is not peripheral, it is central. We urge you to protect and strengthen funding for multilateral institutions, uphold the authority of the International Court of Justice and other dispute resolution mechanisms, resist unilateral measures that erode collective frameworks, champion consistent application of international law, and ensure that small and vulnerable states remain visible in Europe's external engagement. Multilateralism cannot survive on rhetoric alone. It requires political will. The Caribbean and Europe are linked by history, complex and at times painful, but also by shared democratic values and a common belief in international law. In an age when some question the value of global institutions, we must reaffirm the necessity. We do not seek confrontation. We do not seek polarization. What we seek is predictability, fairness, and security that law provides. Honourable members of this Parliament, the defence of territorial integrity is not a regional issue. It is not a European issue. It is not a Caribbean issue. It is the foundation upon which peaceful coexistence rests. If multilateralism erodes, The smallest states will be the first to feel the consequences, but they will not be the last. Europe has long stood as a champion of a rules-based order. At this pivotal moment, their leadership matters profoundly. Let us ensure that sovereignty is not reduced to a privilege of the powerful, but remains the equal right of every nation, large and small. I thank you.
Thank you. You had 2 minutes and 24 seconds extra. But thanks. Thanks anyway. Rodi Tulasi.
C'est bien moi, merci. Je voudrais...
Allow me to start by a summary, because sometimes we do forget. Respect and recognition of territorial integrity starts by respecting oneself. I had the impression this morning that the fundamental knowledge of Europe, at least I understand it, is represented in the region, and this is often forgotten in the rhetoric, in policies, and even in discussions within the European Union and European Parliament. Without the French Republic, then we would not, as Europe, be a maritime superpower around oceans worldwide. Europe would not be in the forefront of the race to space. We would not be recognized as the superpower we are world over. And I mention this because there are some phenomena that we have forgotten for decades. For example, sargassum, which has not drawn the attention of the European Parliament. We could also take the example of the water challenge, which is yet to attract the attention of the European Parliament, and health and sanitation. I raise this because if the RUE treaty that was recently reviewed, and this is urban wastewater, excluded the outermost regions. And what does this mean? It may be calling on states to take the matters of health and sanitation into their own hands. And I'm saying this for the Caribbean colleagues, that within the Caribbean, within the Indian Ocean, and within this region, territories that are European. This is what I'd like to say as pertains to territorial integrity and multilateralism as a whole. If we're going to talk about territorial integrity, we need to recognize the situation we find ourselves in and put in the framework to respect it. Thank you.
Anamaja Henriksson.
Thank you, Chair and honourable members. Let me also first thank all the speakers for their presentations and for the excellent situation analysis we got. We live in a very, I would like to say, dangerous world. The rules-based order is under attack. And therefore, we have to see the world how it is, not as we would like it to be. And I think that it's therefore very crucial that we also in this assembly can see how much we have in common, because together we are democracies fighting against the forces in the world that will get rid of the rule-based order. And we know that the rules we have today, they were adopted after the Second World War. And we have, every one of us have thought that, okay, this is the system that we all are a part of. But the problem now today is that we have countries in the world who look at the situation in a different way. And therefore the question, of course, is how to answer to that. Next week it will be 4 years since Vladimir Putin started and Russia started the unprovoked war against Ukraine. A war that we have in the middle of Europe every day. And this is against all international law. And Europe, EU will continue to support Ukraine. And I will also thank you in the Caribbean countries for the support you have given, because it's crucial. For some weeks ago, we saw President Trump threatening the Kingdom of Denmark, an ally in NATO for a long time back in the years. And all this is a very serious sign that now we have to stand together, and that is what we have to do. And I think that we all in this room can agree that now is the time to show that we will stand up for our values, for the rule-based order, for multilateralism, and we will also show this in practice. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Marco.
Thank you, Co-Chair. I will agree and repeat again that you all see the multilateralism as a strategic necessity, especially for the small countries that cannot individually comfort climate change, organized crime, or economic shocks. I come from Croatia, which is also a small country in the European Union, the country of the 1,000 islands, and I think I could maybe understand your position and your way of the living. But in the European Union, territorial integrity is largely stable and legal, well-defined through establishment borders and strong institutions. Through it faces modern challenges such as cybersecurity threats, hybrid warfare, and tensions related to the Russian aggressions. Multilateralism is deeply embedded in the EU governance, with robust regional mechanism. We have EU institutions, we have Schengen, we have Eurozone, we have cross-border cooperation, and that support all collective security and policy coordination. In contrast, it seems that the Caribbean faces more acute territorial pressures due to maritime border disputes, small state vulnerabilities, and growing geopolitical competition. Question, maybe more to adopt, but considering that I maybe heard some of the answers also. But given the Caribbean's heavy reliance on multilateral cooperation to safeguard territorial integrity and address shared threats, what concrete steps should regional and international partners prioritize to strengthen maritime governance, border control, and crisis response? Thank you.
Thank you. Robert Bijon.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair. And this is a very historic moment. We are having this parliamentary assembly between two regions, but I think this will be also a historic moment because I want to speak Polish. I think never ever before at this forum Polish was heard, so I think this is a great opportunity since we have interpreters who can interpret from Polish into other languages. I will use this opportunity, and I want to use this opportunity also to thank our excellent interpreters for their great work all these hours and days. Thank you very much for your work. So Polish now. Yeah, I think some of you need headphones. Okay. You good?
Yes.
Koledzy, koleżanki.
Dear colleagues, first and foremost, and to start, let me thank you. I thank the hosts from the Caribbean country. Thank you for your support. Especially as pertains to the situation in Ukraine. There is the aggression by Russia in Ukraine, and thank you for supporting me in all international fora as far as this subject has been discussed. This has been aggression against a sovereign state, and it is an existential threat not only for Ukraine, but for our region as a whole. It is important that the Caribbean countries understand, and when we see that this is indeed the case, we have to say loud and clear, we are thankful, we thank you, but beyond that, it is important for us to underscore how important your support is. There is a lot of energy that is being pushed forward. But beyond that, there is a financial, military support that is standby to help Ukraine. This, however, means that we cannot be as involved in other regions as we wish we could be. There is the commitment from the Caribbean region towards the Ukraine, and I repeat that this is excellent. We are having these discussions on territorial integrity, sovereignty, and generally, we could also think about the situation with the Venezuelan president, which shows us that situations could be very fragile for small and average-sized countries. The current political order is hanging at a balance. There are very many examples, as a Greek historian said, that the strongest can do whatever they want and the weak need to hang on as long as they can. So this is something that we must oppose. We have to work together by cooperating without thinking that we are just dishes on a menu for the great countries to decide what they want. This is not the case. We have to go beyond the differences, as the Minister Brown said yesterday, and the bridges between us have to be strong. We do have common borders, and that means that we have common interests. The European Union, through territories such as Curacao, Guadeloupe, and Martinique, have common interests, and those who today question the zone of peace theory should keep this in mind. Common interests and parliamentary diplomacy do bring the political wind that has been talked about today by Mr. Hammond. This is an opportunity for us to strengthen institutions such as CARICOM, the OAS, and do everything within our power to ensure that the Samoa Agreement brings fruit and is fruitful for all of us, especially to protect our territories. Thank you very much, and I'm thankful that you are the first to hear this Polish speech that I have. It has been a pleasure to pronounce. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sir Daniel Fran, MP Daniel Fran.
Thanks, Chair, and I also want to thank the experts. I would have loved to ask a question to Professor Sands, what he would advise us as members of the European Parliament when it comes to the EU-US trade deal, which he qualified as not a very equal and good trade deal, and we'll have to vote on that probably in a couple of weeks or a month. I also want to thank the colleague parliamentarians that have spoken before. It's great to see that there are some supporters for the international rules-based order still, and hearing from all these experiences how territorial disputes are settled in this region, I think lots of parts of the world can learn from what is happening here among different Caribbean states or neighbors. Colleagues have already said the attacks on the rules-based order, also the financial attacks, keeping the UN system working. These are severe challenges that we have to deal with. And I think two aspects that I would like to mention, maybe particularly for this region when it comes to that retreat of the rules-based order, are the fight against illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing. Which is an issue and probably the most lucrative environmental crime that we see in this area. And I think both in terms of upholding the rules, but also protecting the pristine marine environments in many of your countries, this is something that we should jointly address. And secondly, on the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS. This prohibits deep sea mining, for example, and we see now that the US, for example, is putting that into question and wants to basically start deep sea mining in international waters, and that might be something that affects this region maybe first and foremost. And I think there as well, that we jointly should stand up for making sure that UN treaties are binding and enforced, and that we protect the rules that we have agreed on together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. MEP Mark Jongen, are you? Okay, we will now give back the floor to our guest speakers. Madam Street.
Thank you. There was one question in particular for me, the question on the mutual reassurance clause, and I want to indicate to the honorable member that indeed it makes a lot of sense, and we do have in the region the regional security system of the Caribbean, where we have such an undertaking among member states, and so we have that. There are more states to join, but there is the mechanism in the region to respond in unity to certain security threats. I think just to conclude, again, I want to say thank you for inviting me to share the perspectives of Guyana on this important issue at this important forum. And just to underscore, and many members, honorable members, have mentioned the fact that multilateralism is not a convenience, it is a necessity. And so I want to underscore that, and just to say that the consistent application of international law, especially in multilateral fora, separates order from instability, which is what small states like ours need to thrive. In safeguarding our territorial integrity, through multilateralism, we safeguard peace and we secure the conditions that are necessary for us to sustainably develop our resources and our shared prosperity as a region. And I thank you. Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you also. Mr. Martin Herman.
No, thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, nothing much to add because I think Donette said it very, very well. I think sort of the consistent application of international law. And then I just make this point. I mean, I think that the fact that the Caribbean EU Parliamentary Assembly today is making, that by standing together, that is the best way that we can actually defend the rules-based international order, to work together to use it, but also to reform and shape it so it will stand not only sort of the test of times past, but also the test of time to come. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank everyone for this robust discussion on the issues of territorial integrity. At a time when borders are challenged, international norms are tested, and the very foundation of the rule-based international order are under pressure, this session goes straight to the heart of what the international community must defend and how we must defend it. These debates form the foundation for resolving complex and challenging situations. I extend my sincere gratitude to the keynote speakers, panelists, and colleagues for their valuable contribution. Our ability to stand firm in our beliefs is vital to maintaining stability in these changing times. I praise each of you for dedicating your time and courage to speak up when silence might seem easier. This brings us to the end of this session. Thank you all for your attention and your continued dedication to this vital dialogue. Colleagues, we take a short break and we'll resume our work with the Youth Forum. I invite you all to participate and engage during this session with inspiring youth voices.
Well, welcome back. A very interesting afternoon session here at the AUA Conference and Learning Center. I'm Nicola Barreto. We jumped right into it this afternoon, focusing on multilateralism and, of course, a whole lot of other issues when it comes to the rule of law in the region and globally. I'm Nicola Barreto.
And I'm Theresa Goodwin.
All right, so what we can tell you this afternoon is that the focus was territorial integrity and multilateralism. And I know it's a tongue twister, but basically we were looking at an opportunity for small island states like ourselves to speak about what it means to be able to govern, to have our sovereignty not assaulted. And I think the general consensus is that the rule of international law is under assault.
And as one keynote speaker said, multilateralism is not a convenience, it's a necessity.
Definitely.
And I like the contrast, Professor Sands and on the street, the fact that using the Venezuela-Guatemala issue and the Guyana, the Belize and Guatemala and the Guyana and Venezuela issue to show that, you know, there's still a respect for sovereignty. There is still ways in really and truly addressing disputes without conflict and so forth. So I liked those two contrast to show that, you know, there's still, this is where we need to go and this is how issues can be addressed.
And Teresa, there were so many issues when we really looked at the broader picture, because for those of you who may not be familiar with what territorial integrity means, it's a country's right to maintain its territory and sovereignty and free from external interference. So when we say that, we think about the situation in Ukraine. We think about what just took place just about a month and a half ago in Venezuela. We also look at Denmark as well. And we look at the challenge that was faced and still somewhat facing with Guyana and Venezuela. So in context of the Caribbean, I know Prime Minister, Antigua and Barbuda's Prime Minister, the Honorable Gaston Brown, he has been lobbying for more, and I don't want to use the word togetherness, but we need to stand together, the EU, the Caribbean, to make sure that all sovereign rights are not violated.
And there's also a contrast to AOSIS and CARICOM, to these international organizations coming together as one bloc, so that negotiations and speaking from one voice. I think that was essential in the discourse this afternoon to show that, you know, this is where we need to go. We cannot be going at each other's throat. We have to work together if we want that sort of strength.
Yeah, And I think the general consensus, as you rightfully said, is that because we're small island developing states, there's so many challenges that we face. And Martin Bill Herman, he's the Managing Director for Multilateral Relations, Human Rights and Democracy, and Deputy Political Director of the European External Action Service. He made a very, very valid point. He says, there's need for the multilateral court to be strengthened. However, he says there appears to be a lack of willingness to give that system the support necessary for it to perform effectively. And I'm thinking he's speaking specifically about funding and also about resources.
Yes, most definitely. So it was an interesting afternoon, to say the least.
It definitely was. And one of the things that also stood out for me is that leadership does not come from big nations, but it comes from great nations, meaning small island developing states like ourselves, reference made to Prime Minister Mia Mottley in Barbados.
And we know our Prime Minister
definitely as well.
Oliver Gaston Brown has been championing a lot of causes too. So it shows that, yes, not because you're small, we can still have a big voice on international issues.
All right, so this has been the afternoon session of day 2. We are here live at the AUA Conference and Learning Center, and a lot going on. I know that we've got the Youth Forum.
Yes, that's
coming up
next
in just a bit. So we're going to take a break and come right back.